You wake up in a tiny, damp room made of stone and regret. Your mattress is straw. Not, like, metaphorically straw. Literal, scratchy, unwashed straw. You've been sleeping on what might as well be a pile of porcupines who all died of mildew. Your blanket smells like wet goat. There is no pillow. Just the hard reality of your medieval existence pressing into the side of your face like a peasant axe. There is a single window. It is the size of a medieval pigeon, which is convenient because that's exactly who shares it with you, a pigeon. Possibly two. They stare at you judgmentally, as if to say, "You call that a dream?" You stare back at them, bleary-eyed, trying to remember why you're awake, who you are, and whether any of this is real. Because last night, you had a dream. And not the good kind, like flying or modern plumbing. No, your dream was the medieval kind, full of symbols, horses, boiling blood, maybe a talking tree. You saw your dead uncle dressed as a monk, holding a fish and weeping softly. You're not sure if it was a religious vision, an omen, or just the effects of that questionable turnip stew you had for dinner. But here's the thing, you live in the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, dreams aren't just dreams. They're basically your only access to divine Wi-Fi. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like this video and hit subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy this weird, whispery medieval dreamscape I've built for you. And let me know in the comments what time it is where you are. It's always oddly heartwarming to see a dude from Detroit and a librarian in Malaysia both drifting off to sleep while listening to medieval fish symbolism. Anyway, dreams. The medieval mind didn't just think of dreams as subconscious fluff. Oh no, that would be far too modern and reasonable. Dreams were serious business. They were signs, messages, portals to the divine. Sometimes literal prophecies. Other times tests from Satan himself, wearing his best cloak of moral confusion. Your local priest, for instance, probably believes that your dream was sent by God. Or maybe an angel. Or maybe it was Satan pretending to be an angel, pretending to be God, pretending to be your dead uncle. Because that's the kind of logic loop you get when your society's scientific method is whatever smells like incense and guilt. You sit up. Your spine audibly crunches. Everything hurts, including your soul. You're still thinking about that dream. It was vivid. Maybe too vivid. You remember floating above a battlefield covered in serpents. You saw a golden ladder leading up into the clouds, guarded by a lion in a bishop's hat. Normal stuff. Your dream journal, if you had one, would be a medieval bestiary written by someone on expired mushrooms. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is 12th century Europe. And here, dreams are sorted into three delightful, incomprehensible categories: visio, visum, and insomnium. Sounds Latin? That's because it is. Because if you want to make nonsense sound official, you say it in Latin. It's the medieval version of calling yourself a sleep performance consultant instead of guy who sells lavender spray at the market. A visio is a dream sent by God. A holy revelation. These were the good ones, usually reserved for monks, saints, and that one guy who didn't eat for 40 days because a goat told him not to. These dreams often involve complex symbols like ladders, fires, celestial music, or obscure Bible references, which, spoiler, most people couldn't actually read. Then you've got visum. Those are dreams that come from external forces. Ghosts. Demons. That one angel who didn't pass the background check. These dreams are dangerous because they might trick you into sinning. Like dreaming of your neighbor's wife and waking up with questions. Medieval priests were very concerned about nocturnal emissions. Yes, those. They even debated whether you were culpable for your dream sins. Short answer, yes. Everything is your fault. And finally, we have insomnium, the garbage dreams. These are the ones caused by indigestion, a full moon, or an unfortunate combination of barley beer and spiritual anxiety. These are the dreams where your dog is talking, your dead grandfather is breakdancing, and the Pope is covered in frogs. You are advised to ignore these. Which is hard, because sometimes they're the most entertaining. You stand up, stretch, and contemplate whether you should tell someone about your dream. Maybe the village priest. Maybe your cousin who thinks he's a prophet. Maybe no one, because last time you told someone you dreamed about a naked king in a cheese barrel, you were forced to fast for 3 days and drink holy vinegar. The good news? There's an entire genre of medieval literature dedicated to explaining dreams. The bad news? It makes modern astrology look like quantum physics. One of the big names here is Macrobius, a Roman guy, premedieval, technically. But his ideas were adopted, recycled, and misquoted by pretty much every monastery scribe with a candle and a superiority complex. He laid out a 5-part dream classification system, which medieval scholars pretended to understand. You've got somnium, visio, oraculum, insomnium, and phantasma. Each one has a different source: divine, demonic, digestive, or just inexplicable brain noise. You rub your temples. Your head hurts, possibly from the dream, possibly from the lice in your hood. You think about asking someone for dream advice. There are professional dream interpreters in some parts of medieval Europe, usually monks, sometimes traveling weirdos who call themselves wise men but smell like fermented despair. And if you lived in Byzantium, oh boy, you'd be in luck, because Byzantine culture was obsessed with dream interpretation. There's this whole thing called the Onira Critica, written by Artemidorus, a guy from the 2nd century who basically created the first medieval version of a dream dictionary. It's 5 volumes of pure, glorious lunacy. For example, if you dream about being beheaded, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll die. It might mean your servant will leave you, or that your taxes will be reduced, or that you'll get promoted, or demoted. It depends on how many teeth the executioner had and whether you bled clockwise. You wander out into the village, still chewing over your dream like it's a piece of philosophical gristle. The sun is just rising, casting a pale light over muddy fields, cold stone walls, and the occasional extremely judgmental chicken. You pass a couple of neighbors, both of whom also look like they woke up from dreams involving biblical horses and accidental heresy. Your friend Jeffrey tells you he dreamed of flying above the cathedral and dropping eggs on the bishop. He's not sure if this means he's blessed or damned. Possibly both. Medieval theology loves a good paradox. Up is down. Sin is inevitable. Sleep is dangerous. And dreams? Dreams are either the keys to heaven or coupons for damnation. There's a woman in the village, Marjorie. Everyone thinks she's a bit odd, mostly because she talks about her dreams openly. Last week, she claimed the Virgin Mary appeared to her in a vision and told her to walk into the forest and kiss a tree, which she did, twice. The local priest is currently trying to decide whether she's holy, possessed, or just really into foliage. You continue walking, trying to remember if your dream involved anything obviously symbolic. Was the fish a symbol of Christ? Or was it just your brain doing its usual nonsense? Did the weeping uncle mean you're going to die? Or that you shouldn't eat smoked eel before bed? You reach the edge of the village, where the fields stretch out like soggy dreams you can't quite hold onto. There's a stream, babbling gently. You stare into it, because you've heard that water helps cleanse bad dreams. That's not science. That's superstition. But honestly, that's all you got. No therapy. No neuroscience. No cozy TED Talk explaining REM cycles. Just you, your dream, and a vague fear that it means something terrible. You splash your face. It's cold. Icy, actually. Welcome to the real world. No running water. No electric kettle. Just chill, muddy water that probably has a sheep foot in it somewhere. You decide to pray, just in case. Maybe God sent you that dream. Maybe it was Satan. Maybe it was your brain doing jazz improv because it doesn't have TikTok to distract it. Either way, the message has been received, sort of. You close your eyes, take a breath, and try not to think too hard about what it all means. Because in the medieval world, dreams are both deeply important and absolutely meaningless, depending on who you ask. And either way, they're unavoidable. Just like waking up in a world that believes your dreams matter more than your breakfast. And speaking of breakfast, there isn't one. Just barley mush, boiled water, and the subtle taste of existential dread. Sleep well. You're still hungry. The barley mush tastes like someone whispered the word food over a bowl of beige sadness and then walked away. It's lukewarm, slightly gray, possibly alive. You eat it anyway, because this is the 12th century, and choices for the nobility. You are not nobility. You are, at best, literate adjacent. Your dream still lingers behind your eyes like a particularly clingy bat. You try to shake it off. Maybe get on with your day. But no, it's there. That ladder. The lion. The fish. The mournful breeze that whispered your name backwards. Classic stuff. You've read enough saints' lives to know that this could either mean sainthood or syphilis. Your neighbor, old Thomas, stops by to trade stale bread for a jug of regretfully homemade ale. He's got a story for you. He always does. This one is about a guy who dreamed of wolves every night for a week. Then his wife left him. Was it a prophecy? A curse? A metaphor for marriage? Hard to say. But it's made you paranoid. And that's the thing about medieval dreams. Even when you're awake, you're not really off the hook. Because everything you do during the day could also be part of a divine message. You trip over a rock? It's a sign. You sneeze twice? Also a sign. You accidentally step on a chicken? You may as well start digging your own grave. The chicken was probably an angel. You finish your sad mush and wander over to the tiny local chapel. It's the size of a modern studio apartment, but less comfortable and with worse insulation. Inside, Father Baldwin is already mumbling Latin to himself while rearranging relics. One of the relics is allegedly the finger bone of Saint Euphemia, though it looks suspiciously like a whittled potato. You ask him, cautiously, about dreams. He lights a candle, sighs, and launches into a 45-minute sermon about Joseph, Pharaoh, and grain silos. He explains how Joseph, dream analyst extraordinaire of the Old Testament, basically made his career interpreting Pharaoh's weird subconscious nightmares about fat cows and skinny cows. That story, by the way, was basically the medieval equivalent of a TED Talk on economic planning, except everyone in the story wears robes and has suspiciously accurate access to symbolic logic. The takeaway? Dreams matter. They can shape empires. Or at least get you promoted to chief grain guy. But Father Baldwin warns you, dreams must be interpreted cautiously. If they come from God, that's wonderful. If they come from Satan, well, good luck. The devil loves dreams. He can use them to tempt, trick, or traumatize you. He might disguise himself as a saint, or a talking dog, or your Aunt Maud, who's been dead for 6 years but keeps telling you to burn things. The priest says you should fast, pray, and maybe sleep on the church floor tonight to ward off further nightly confusion. You agree, mostly because your home mattress smells like fungus and betrayal. And there's something kind of nice about the church floor. Cold, hard, sanctified. Not ideal for the spine, but great for moral clarity. You kneel awkwardly. Your knees are not what they once were, probably because they were never anything to begin with. As you mutter your prayers, you remember that the church actually had an entire debate, like literal councils, about what dreams meant. St. Augustine said some dreams come from God, some from demons, and some from our own distracted minds. Thomas Aquinas added that dreams can be influenced by digestion. So yes, even medieval theology knew that your dinner could summon Satan. But medieval monks took it further, much further. The Benedictine rule warned monks to be wary of dreams that stirred unlawful lusts. Translation: if you dreamt of someone's ankles, you might be in spiritual danger. Better confess. Maybe flagellate yourself a bit. Nothing like a little self-whipping to cleanse the subconscious. Oh, and speaking of confessing, there were actual confession manuals that included sections on dreams. Like, if you had an impure dream, did you consent to it? Did you enjoy it? Did you wake up and think about it too long? Congratulations, you're going to need to do penance and avoid cheese before bed. You leave the chapel feeling both spiritually informed and physically uncomfortable. The sky is gray. Of course it is. This is England. Or France. Or maybe the Holy Roman Empire. Honestly, it's hard to tell. Everything's muddy, the roads are terrible, and everyone smells like damp wool and disappointment. You pass by the house of a midwife named Elspeth. She claims to have prophetic dreams. Last winter, she dreamed that 3 wolves danced in a circle and then it snowed for 40 days. She was right about the snow, wrong about the wolves. But now everyone comes to her for dream interpretations. She charges 2 chickens and a handful of herbs. Or just gossip, if it's juicy enough. You ask her about your dream, the ladder, the lion, the fish. She squints at you. Says the ladder is your spiritual journey. The lion is pride. And the fish? The fish means transformation. Or flatulence. Could be either. She recommends you carry an amulet made of rowan bark and bat fur. For clarity. Or digestion. Back at home, you try to rest. The afternoon light is pale and dusty. You lie down, but your brain won't stop racing. You keep thinking about those medieval dream books, the Somnial Danielis, for instance. An actual dream dictionary used by monks and lay people alike. It listed hundreds of dream symbols and their meanings. Dream of bread, prosperity. Dream of dogs, betrayal. Dream of stars, you'll soon travel. Dream of onions, you're going to cry. Groundbreaking. The best part? These books were copied and recopied across centuries, by candlelight, with each scribe occasionally adding their own opinions. So over time, dream dictionaries became a glorious mess of contradictions. Dream of water, good sign. Or bad. Or death. Or rebirth. Or your cousin owes you money. You doze off for a minute. Just a minute. And then, you dream again. You're walking through a forest. The trees are tall, unnaturally tall, whispering in Latin. There's a woman in white. Could be the Virgin Mary. Could be your mother, hard to tell in dream logic. She's holding an hourglass made of bones and pointing toward a door made of stars. You open the door. Inside, a cow is playing a harp. A monk floats by, muttering something about penance and soup. You wake up with a start, covered in sweat, or possibly holy water. Hard to be sure. You write it down, with a stick, in mud. Because parchment is expensive and your literacy is enthusiastic but questionable. You decide it's time to do what all respectable medieval people do when confronted by mysterious dreams. Consult the stars. Astrology, in the Middle Ages, is not just for bored nobles and dramatic poets. It's a serious science. The moon governs moisture. Mars governs war. Mercury governs dreams and, for some reason, bowel irregularities. You find a local stargazer named Bernard who has a beard that screams, "I once touched a comet with my mind." He asks when you were born. You don't know. No one knows. So he improvises. According to Bernard, you're under the influence of Saturn, which means your dreams will be heavy, serious, possibly prophetic, but also kind of depressing. If you were under Jupiter, your dreams would be optimistic. Mars would give you nightmares. Venus would make them, well, let's just say confession-worthy. Bernard says your dream suggests a transformation is coming. Or taxes. Possibly both. Definitely something involving regret and firewood. You thank him, give him a chicken leg, and walk away. The sun is setting now. The sky turns the color of old parchment and impending dread. The village quiets down. You return to your damp, blessedly quiet hovel. Light a candle. Stare into the flame. Wonder if maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe dreams are just dreams. But then again, maybe not. Because in the medieval world, sleep is not rest. It's not peace. It's a battlefield. A test. A conversation with angels, demons, and the occasional prophetic goose. You lie down. The straw pokes your ribs. The wind howls like it knows your name. Somewhere, in the distance, an owl hoots with suspicious intent. And once again, you begin to dream. You wake up to a rooster screaming like it's auditioning for Medieval X Factor. But it's not singing. It's warning. Warning you that morning has returned, uninvited, and with a vengeance. The sun creeps in through the window with all the subtlety of a tax collector. Your eyes are crusted with regret and barn dust. Your back hurts. Your knees hurt. Your teeth feel like they've been lightly sanded in your sleep. Congratulations, it's another day in the 13th century. You vaguely remember your dream from the night before. There was a goat, a crown, a river flowing backwards, possibly a merchant made of bees. It was either a profound message from the Almighty, or your digestion revolting against the half-fermented cabbage you ate by candlelight. Possibly both. In medieval logic, there's no contradiction in something being spiritually meaningful and an indicator that your colon is cursed. You roll off your straw-stuffed mattress, which smells like mildew, goat hair, and broken promises, and begin your daily routine. First, splash some icy water on your face from a wooden bucket that was never fully cleaned after last season's fish incident. Then rub your teeth with a twig. Medieval toothpaste? None. You chew a stick. It's minty if you're lucky. If not, it's just stick. But you're distracted. That dream is haunting you again. It clings to the folds of your waking mind like a damp linen tunic, which, coincidentally, is exactly what you're wearing. You step outside. It's chilly, Because of course it is. You breathe in the smell of manure, wood smoke, and early death. The clouds hang low and damp, like they're judging you for your life choices. Which they are. You decide to do what any rational medieval person would do in your situation. Consult a dream interpreter. Not a priest this time. You've already gotten the theological spiel about temptation and satanic symbolism. No, this time you're going secular. Folk wisdom. Peasant psychics. Village oracles who probably haven't bathed since the last eclipse but know the symbolism of owls in 15 dialects. There's a woman named Magda who lives on the edge of the forest. She's rumored to speak to wolves and once predicted a drought by staring at a rock for 6 hours. Her shack smells like smoke, herbs, and possibly despair. She invites you in and peers at you like you might turn into a beetle at any moment. You tell her the dream, the goat, the crown, the river running backwards. She nods slowly, mumbles something about the goat representing stubbornness, the crown meaning you're destined for trouble with authority, and the river indicating a reversal of fortune. Or urine retention. She's not sure. She tosses some dried nettles onto the fire for atmosphere. Then she hands you a book. A rare thing. Hand-copied, smudged with thumbprints, probably stolen from a monastery 3 abbots ago. It's a translation of the Dream of Scipio, a Roman philosophical dream vision that medieval scholars pretended to understand. In it, a Roman general has a dream about the heavens and the fate of souls and basically gets a crash course in Neoplatonism while asleep. You can't read Latin. You nod anyway. She points to a page covered in marginalia, little notes written by monks, each one more unhinged than the last. One says, "A dream of fire means the wrath of God is near." Another simply reads, "Do not trust dreams involving geese." Wise. You leave her hut slightly more confused than when you entered, but also soothed in a weird way. Because medieval dream interpretation wasn't about clarity. It was about layering meaning onto chaos. If your subconscious is a stew of fear, memory, and spiritual panic, then dream books are the bread you use to sop it all up. Back in the village, you find yourself wondering how this obsession with dream symbolism became such a thing. So here's a quick history lesson, the kind your school never taught because it wasn't sponsored by a holy relic or a baron. Long before medieval peasants started worrying about goat dreams, ancient civilizations were already in deep. The Babylonians had entire catalogs of dreams, compiled on clay tablets, with handy interpretations for each one. Dream of a dead relative? Good luck. Dream of teeth falling out? You're cursed. Dream of flying? Either divine favor, or you accidentally ate lead. The Egyptians took it further. Dream books were found buried with pharaohs. They believed dreams were messages from gods, and sometimes the gods showed up mid-dream with a very long list of royal demands. The Greeks, predictably, intellectualized the whole thing. Aristotle thought dreams were basically the body talking to itself, like a very tired digestive tract trying to write poetry. Hippocrates blamed dreams on vapors. Always with the vapors. Plato, ever the drama queen, believed dreams let the soul glimpse eternal truths, assuming the soul had time between wars and plagues. Then came the Romans, who did what Romans always did, stole everyone else's ideas, put them in togas, and added bureaucracy. Cicero, the Roman statesman who had opinions on everything, talked about prophetic dreams like they were overdue tax scrolls. He was skeptical, because of course he was. But once Christianity rolled in, dreams took on a whole new meaning. Early Christians were obsessed with sorting divine dreams from demonic ones. This led to the creation of spiritual filtering. Essentially, if you dreamed something nice, it was probably from God. If you dreamed something sinful or terrifying, it was obviously the devil doing improv theater inside your skull. Monks became dream archivists. Cloistered, underfed archivists with poor lighting and worse nutrition. But they documented everything. A nun dreamed of Christ bleeding in her lap? Write it down. A monk dreamed of being chased by demons with duck feet? Add it to the vision scroll. And then there were visionary texts. Think medieval fever dreams on parchment. The Visions of Tundale is a real standout. An Irish knight has a near-death experience and sees the afterlife in graphic, terrifying detail. Demons. Flames. Sinners boiling in vats of pus. You know, bedtime reading. But one of the most famous dream-obsessed texts? The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, a man who clearly needed a nap and some emotional support. He turned his entire midlife crisis into a three-part dream journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, complete with celebrity cameos from Virgil and his dead crush, Beatrice. It's technically fiction, but to medieval minds, it was also true. Symbolic, holy, uncomfortably specific. You think about all this while tending to your sad patch of cabbage. The wind howls again, probably with meaning. The truth is, medieval people didn't separate dream life from real life the way modern people do. Your soul, they believed, wandered while you slept. It could visit angels, or hell, or weirdly bureaucratic visions of the afterlife with stares and judgmental saints with clipboards. You weren't just sleeping. You were traveling, which is a lovely idea, right? Except when your dreams are full of rats, snakes, and blood. Then it's less of a vision and more of a cryptic panic attack, curated by a particularly vindictive archangel. As you sit by the hearth that evening, wrapping yourself in a blanket that's only slightly less itchy than penance, you reflect on the true horror of medieval dreams, the consequences. See, you couldn't just have a dream. You had to account for it. Nobles kept dream journals. Kings consulted astrologers. Clerics fasted for days to purge dream impurity. Even peasants, with their 3 spoons and no bathtub, believed that dreams could bring omens, punishments, or revelations. There were rituals. Some people slept with holy relics under their pillows, bits of saints, splinters from the true cross, or in one documented case, a knuckle bone wrapped in linen. Others burned herbs before bed to induce clean dreams. Mugwort, vervain, poppy, nature's pre-modern NyQuil. And then there were dream incubators. Special sites, often shrines or caves, where people went specifically to have a dream. They'd fast, pray, sleep on sacred ground, and hope to receive a vision. If they didn't, try again next month. Maybe bring more goats. You lie down, exhausted from cabbage duty and existential dread. You whisper a prayer, not because you're devout, but because dreams are weird and you'd like to avoid being chased by a talking cow again. You stare at the ceiling. There's a spider up there. You try not to read too much into it. But deep down, you wonder, is it a sign? Is it the devil? Is it Charlotte from Charlotte's Web making a medieval cameo? Probably just a spider. But then again, the room grows colder. The fire sputters. You drift into sleep. And once again, your mind unravels into shapes, symbols, whispers, and the echo of hooves. You wake up and immediately regret doing so. Your entire body is somehow both sore and numb. Your legs feel like boiled eels. Your tongue tastes like something died in your mouth, something that had strong opinions about raw onions. You roll over on your wooden slatted bed frame, stuffed with straw and old regrets, and try to remember what century it is. All right, the medieval one. The no central heating and definitely no deodorant one. The dream is still with you. Again. This time it involved a white deer, a staircase made of bread, and a monk with 6 eyes muttering the phrase, "The blood moon tolls for thee." Standard stuff, really. But here's the problem. You live in a time when dreams aren't just dreams. No, that would be far too easy. Here, dreams are messages. Dreams are prophecies. Dreams are tests. Dreams are also, somehow, social crimes if you mention them to the wrong person. And this one? It's weird enough to cause concern. So, naturally, you do what anyone would do when threatened by the vague possibility of spiritual condemnation. You go find a saint. Okay, not a living saint. Most of those are busy starving themselves into transcendence in a cave somewhere or speaking in tongues no one understands. No, you go to a shrine. You know, a long walk away, uphill, in the rain, with your toes squelching in sandals that smell like mold and despair. Because if you want divine clarity in this world, it must be earned through discomfort. There are no shortcuts, only blisters. The shrine you're visiting is dedicated to Saint Cuthbert, patron of, well, a lot of vague things. Peace, nature, people who lose socks, probably dreams too. At this point, why not? You arrive after 3 days of walking, 2 dead rats, 1 suspicious encounter with a hermit who claimed to be Jesus' third cousin, and precisely 0 moments of inner peace. The shrine is majestic in the way that only medieval shrines can be, dripping with candle wax, vaguely damp, and full of people crying into pieces of bone. St. Cuthbert's knuckle is displayed in a glass case. Someone is praying to it. Someone else is licking it. You pretend not to notice. You kneel, whisper your dream aloud to the relic, and wait. Because of course you wait. Waiting is holy. And while you wait, your mind wanders, not back to sleep, unfortunately, but back to the question. The one you've been quietly, uncomfortably ignoring. What is a dream? Is it a message from the heavens? Is it a divine telegram, hand-delivered to your soul by a glowing archangel with bad timing? Or is it just your brain leaking thoughts while your body lies useless and drooling? If you'd asked a medieval theologian, say, Thomas Aquinas, who looked like he hadn't slept since baptism, he would have given you a very long answer that included words like phantasmata and rational soul. But let's distill it down to the basics. Aquinas believed dreams could be divine, but most weren't. Most were just nonsense bubbling up from your overly flesh-bound brain, like a stew that had been left on the fire too long and started hallucinating. Unless the dream had clear moral significance, then it was probably a test, or a warning, or both. Of course, if you'd asked St. Augustine, patron saint of guilt and brooding, he'd tell you to be very careful. Because the devil, he warned, loves to whisper in dreams. Especially the saucy ones. You know the type. The kind that wake you up with a guilty blush and a very awkward morning prayer. Augustine once confessed that he had dreams where he sinned, and then he'd wake up convinced it was his fault anyway. This is the man who believed original sin was inherited like a family heirloom. He was not in the mood for nighttime pleasure visions. The takeaway? In medieval Christian thought, there were basically 4 kinds of dreams. First, divine dreams. These are your prophetic, God-sent, glowy-visaged angelic message dreams. Usually involve light, fire, glowing scrolls, or the voice of someone speaking Aramaic in perfect iambic pentameter. Very rare. Only reserved for saints, holy fools, and once, reportedly, a sheep farmer named Gerbert who fell asleep in a field and dreamt of the apocalypse. He became a bishop. The dream may or may not have been about indigestion. Second, demonic dreams. These are your temptation dreams. The kind with, flesh, sin, possibly a goat wearing lipstick. These were said to be crafted by demons who poked your imagination while you slept, like unlicensed carnival puppeteers. If you woke up from one of these feeling too excited, a fast was recommended. Or a bath. Or both. But probably just more guilt. Third, natural dreams. Just the brain doing its thing. These were often dismissed as phantasms of the belly, which sounds like a prog rock album, but really means your digestive system is having an opinion about dinner. Fourth, and perhaps most hilariously, neutral/meaningless dreams, which were also possibly dangerous. Because if you dismissed them too casually, and they were from God, then congrats. You just ignored divine wisdom and are now cursed to stub your toe for eternity. So yes, no pressure. But medieval people didn't just leave it at that. Oh no. They systematized the madness. Enter the dream manuals. Now, if you lived in a monastery with a decent scriptorium and an abbot who wasn't hoarding all the ink, you might come across texts like Samuel Danieli's Daniel's Dream Book. It was the medieval bestseller of dream interpretation. Like a spiritual BuzzFeed listicle, it told you what every dream symbol really meant. Dream of fish? Good luck. Dream of being naked? Shame or freedom? Flip a coin. Dream of losing teeth? Death in the family. Or bad dental hygiene. Or both. Dream of flying? Divine elevation. Dream of falling? Punishment is coming. Probably related to that thing you did. You know the one. These books were copied and recopied, translated into multiple languages, and passed from court to court like divine cheat sheets. Even kings consulted them. Especially kings. Because when you're sleeping on a pile of wolfskins and guilt, you want to be sure that dream of a burning throne wasn't a celestial eviction notice. Speaking of royal dreams, let's talk about Charlemagne, Holy Roman Emperor and enthusiast of night visions. According to some records, he dreamed of a stairway to heaven, no, not the Led Zeppelin kind, and took it as a sign of victory. His court scribes wrote it down, embellished it, and added some angels for flavor. Or take Emperor Constantine, whose dream before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge featured a cross in the sky and a booming voice telling him, "In this sign, conquer." He painted crosses on everything and then won the battle. So naturally, the dream became canon. Not figuratively, literally. The church wrote it into history as proof that God likes dramatic lighting and battlefield dreams. But not everyone who dreamt big got a statue. There's a charming account of an Irish monk named Baron who dreamt of sailing to paradise. Instead, he got stuck on a whale, which turned out to be an island, which turned out to be not paradise, which turned out to be a whale again. The medieval mind didn't shy away from metaphor or maritime misadventures. And we can't forget dream visions, a whole genre of medieval literature where someone falls asleep and wakes up inside their own symbolism. These stories were full of allegories, mountains representing pride, rivers as sin, flowers as purity, talking animals as judgmental narrators. Your subconscious was a medieval theme park, and everyone had a ticket. The most famous? Piers Plowman. A long, baffling, allegorical dream poem where a moon falls asleep, dreams of a field full of people doing sinful stuff, and then goes on a quest for truth. Spoiler, it takes a while, and nobody's happy. By this point, you're back from the shrine, a little lighter in the soul, heavier in the foot-blister department, and still haunted by that dear dream. But now, at least, you have options. You could talk to a priest, consult a dream book, seek out a traveling wise woman who smells like vinegar and boiled radishes. Or you could write it down. Because even in the mud and smoke of the medieval world, people kept dream journals. Mostly monks, who had access to ink and too much solitude. But also nobles, especially if the dream involved horses, crowns, or unsettling prophetic visions involving their political rivals being devoured by eagles. One particularly famous dream journal belongs to Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess, who basically turned her visions into a multimedia empire. She saw fireballs, angels, cosmic wheels, rivers of stars. She drew them, wrote them down, composed music to go with them. She was the medieval equivalent of an avant-garde dream influencer. If Instagram had existed, she'd have had a glowing halo filter and 40K followers. Minimum. You close your eyes again, finally back in your straw bed, a little wiser, a little itchier. You think of all the people across time who looked up at the same stars, or at least similar, less light-polluted ones, and wondered what their dreams meant. Some saw prophecy. Some saw sin. Some saw metaphor, shadow, warning, hope. Some just saw flying sheep and chalked it up to a bad turnip. But all of them, saints, peasants, queens, scribes, believed that when the world grew dark and the fire dimmed, the soul might speak, or listen, or simply dance around inside the head like a slightly drunk jester. You drift toward sleep. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a goat smiles and vanishes into mist. The moon watches silently. You don't need to understand. You just need to dream. You wake up in the middle of the night. Your throat is dry. Your back aches. Something smells like boiled cabbage and moral decay. And you swear, just for a second, that you saw something sitting on your chest. You blink. Nothing. Just the shadow of your wooden ceiling beams, your hay-stuffed mattress, and a lingering sense that a goat-faced something tried to steal your breath while whispering the Latin word for unworthy. Congratulations. You've just had a medieval nightmare. Or, as they sometimes called it, the mare. And no, this has nothing to do with horses. Though if you do dream of horses, that's a different problem entirely, possibly involving warfare, lust, or unresolved political ambition, depending on the century. But the mare was different. It wasn't a dream, it was an experience. A visitation. A full-body supernatural assault carried out while you were completely defenseless, drooling into a lumpy pillow. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill bad dream. This was the heavy, terrifying, breath-stealing pressure of something sitting on your chest. You couldn't move, couldn't speak. You were paralyzed, and the weight just kept pushing. People in the medieval world didn't call this sleep paralysis. They called it being ridden by the night hag. Yes, that's the technical term. Night hag. Also known as the Alp in Germanic folklore, the Mara in Norse mythology, or simply that thing that sits on you and ruins your night and possibly your soul. This phenomenon was so universally recognized that art from the period literally depicts it. The infamous 1781 painting by Henry Fuseli titled The Nightmare shows a limp, half-naked woman draped across a bed, while a squat demon perches happily on her chest like it's a sofa. The implication is clear. If you had one of these episodes, it wasn't your imagination. Something had visited you. And it was not there for small talk. So before you get too cozy and fall asleep under your fur blanket that smells faintly of badger, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this half-scholarly, half-sarcastic descent into medieval weirdness. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm always fascinated to see who's lying awake at 2:37 a.m. trying to understand medieval night demons instead of counting sheep. Anyway, back to your chess demon. In medieval Europe, this nightmare wasn't just a curiosity. It was a danger. People believed that these nighttime oppressors were real spirits, and they could be summoned by witches, by demons, or, inconveniently, by people you'd annoyed in real life. Did your neighbor glare at you across the communal oven after you took the last barley loaf? Boom. Mare attack. Wake up gasping. And while modern science chalks it up to disrupted REM cycles and brain chemistry, medieval thinkers had different theories. These included, but were not limited to, too much hot food before bed, sexual impurity, demonic possession, a toad under your pillow, an unresolved theological debate from earlier in the day. Sometimes, priests were called in to exorcise the bedroom. Other times, people placed iron knives under their mattress to ward off spirits. Or they drew chalk circles. Or they wore herbs around their neck that smelled like punishment and regret. The worst part? Some people didn't just suffer alone. Some people had dreams that led to lawsuits. Yes, welcome to the legal part of medieval dreams. You didn't think your subconscious could testify in court? Think again. There are actual, historical records of people being tried based on dream evidence. It's not as common as, say, being burned at the stake for being slightly odd in public, but it happened. Take, for example, the case of William of Ramsey, a 13th-century monk who dreamed that his dead abbot appeared to him in a vision. The ghostly abbot pointed an accusing finger and said something like, "There is money hidden in the wall. I was greedy. Dig it up. Redeem my soul." So William told the authorities. They dug into the wall. Sure enough, hidden coins. The abbot had, indeed, been hoarding silver. There was a posthumous scandal, ecclesiastical debate, and the dream was cited as divine revelation. Now, was this the medieval version of an inside tip from a ghost? Or a very clever way for William to casually expose some corruption while sounding holy? Hard to say. But either way, it shows how seriously dreams were taken in matters of morality, and sometimes even justice. In another infamous case, a woman claimed in court that her deceased husband had come to her in a dream and confessed that he had hidden money under a floorboard before he died. She used this dream as proof that she was owed the money, not her in-laws. The court actually considered it. Not every judge agreed, but many did. Why? Because in the medieval mind, a dream, especially one involving a dead person, wasn't just a dream. It was a visitation. The dead weren't quiet. They gossiped. They warned. They whined about unfinished business. And occasionally, they spilled estate secrets. And what about dreams as evidence of guilt? In some heresy trials, people were accused of being witches or heretics based on the content of their dreams. If you dreamt of flying, demonic influence. If you dreamt of strange beasts or upside-down churches, clearly you've been cavorting with the devil. Or eating suspect mushrooms. Or both. But don't worry, it wasn't all hellfire and brimstone. Some dreams were helpful. Like the classic tale of Peter Damian, a reforming monk in the 11th century who dreamed of a burning ladder leading to heaven. This dream apparently inspired him to go full monastic mode, fasting, praying, avoiding baths. You know, the usual monk routine. In fact, many monasteries encourage dream recording. Dreams were considered part of spiritual development, especially when they involved moral lessons, angelic instruction, or cryptic Latin warnings whispered into your ear at 3 a.m. by a faceless entity that smelled like myrrh and anxiety. But what if your dreams were too weird? That was tricky. There's a case from the 14th century of a nun named Agnes who confessed that she dreamed of Christ visiting her in the form of a black dog. She said he barked wisdom at her. This made the local bishop deeply uncomfortable. He asked her to stop having the dream. She replied that it wasn't her choice, the dog just kept showing up. Eventually, the bishop told her to ignore the dream entirely, which is about as effective as telling someone not to think about elephants in nightgowns. She kept dreaming. The dog kept barking. No one was happy. And then there's Marjorie Kemp. Ah yes, Marjorie. Possibly the most emotionally intense medieval Christian mystic to ever document her inner life in excruciating detail. She had dreams. Oh, so many dreams. Jesus appeared to her. Mary spoke to her. The saints told her she was special. Her neighbors told her to calm down. She wrote it all down. Well, dictated it all down, since she couldn't write. Her book became one of the earliest autobiographies in English, essentially a dream-filled memoir of tears, religious ecstasy, unwanted visions, and her deep belief that her nightly encounters were divinely ordained. Whether you love her or want her to please stop talking about weeping for 5 minutes, Marjorie's dreams shaped her entire identity. And in doing so, reminded everyone that dreams, however strange, had power. Even if that power was mostly to make your confessor deeply nervous. So what can we take from all this? Well, for one, medieval people lived with their dreams. They didn't compartmentalize them as just brain static. They didn't dismiss them with a shrug and a latte. They wrestled with them. Dreams could guide a pilgrim to a holy site. Dreams could expose a sin. Dreams could accuse you of heresy. Dreams could show you your future, or your failure, or your last supper, which, unfortunately, involved cabbage again. And above all, dreams were communal. People shared them. They talked about them. They interpreted each other's. They told stories about others' dreams as if they were public messages from the divine post office. The result? A world where your dream life wasn't private. It was part of your moral life. A field in which God, demons, dead relatives, and perhaps even a slightly sarcastic goat could all take turns influencing your fate. You roll over again in your itchy tunic. The straw pokes your side. Somewhere, in the distance, a donkey brays an agreement. You think of the mare, of the barking Christ dog, of the chest-sitting imp who just wants to vibe in the shadows of your soul. And you realize, whether you dreamed of judgment or joy, fire or feathers, ladders or latrines, you were never truly alone in the night. Something always came visiting. You close your eyes and let it come. You're dreaming again. It's one of those dreams. You know the kind. You're in a graveyard. There's mist. A voice whispers your name, but in Latin, so it feels extra ominous. You see your own face reflected in a puddle, but it's old and sad and covered in ash. A blackbird flies overhead and drops a human tooth onto your shoulder. You wake up, cold sweat, heart pounding, and then you remember. You're living in the Middle Ages, which means you are, obviously, going to die. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe next Tuesday when that suspicious mole turns out to be a divine punishment. But if you dreamed of your own death, if you saw it in your sleep, then it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning, or a promise, or a sentence. Medieval people, you see, took death dreams very seriously. In a time when medicine involved bloodletting, leeches, and prayers muttered over your belly button, people needed all the help they could get predicting their exit. Dreams became a kind of grim weather forecast for the soul. The logic was simple. If you could dream of your own death, maybe you could prepare. Get your affairs in order. Confess that thing you did in 1327 involving someone else's goat and a forged indulgence. You know, the usual. But let's back up. Why did medieval people think dreams could predict death? Well, it's a long story involving theology, Aristotle, and monks who had too much time and not enough entertainment. But at the core of it, the idea was this: dreams were messages, and some of those messages came from God. If you dreamed of your own death, it might not be metaphorical. It might be divine scheduling. Monks in particular were fascinated by this. You'd think monks, whose lives mostly involved praying, copying manuscripts, and sitting in silence while eating cabbage, wouldn't be super into death. But you'd be wrong. Medieval monks were obsessed with it. They talked about death the way modern people talk about gym routines or their favorite pizza toppings. For them, death wasn't scary. It was inevitable. And ideally, it should come with a proper lead-up, preferably involving a holy vision, the smell of incense, and at least one Latin phrase shouted into the void. Which brings us to one of the juiciest pieces of monklit, the dialogues of Pope Gregory the Great. This isn't bedtime reading, unless your bedtime involves fear, fire, and spiritual anxiety. But it's packed with stories of monks and lay people who dreamed of their death, and then, lo and behold, died. One such story goes like this. A monk dreams that an angel comes to him and tells him he will die in 7 days. Does the monk freak out? No. He thanks the angel, confesses all his sins, takes communion, forgives everyone who ever annoyed him in the cloister, including Brother Marcus, who always snores, and dies peacefully. The moral? Death dreams are gifts. Unless they weren't. Because sometimes they weren't nice, quiet dreams of a smiling angel giving you a gentle spiritual countdown. Sometimes they were horrible. There's another tale. This one from Bede the Venerable, yes, that's his full name, like a medieval rapper, about a man who dreams he's in a dark, stinking valley filled with fire, demons, and people screaming. Then he sees a bridge. A very narrow bridge. Across the bridge are angels. They say, "You're not dead yet, but we're just letting you know. Repent." The man wakes up, drenched in sweat and terror, and immediately dedicates his life to not going to hell. So yes, sometimes death dreams weren't about timing. They were about destination. And what you did next could, allegedly, change it. Let's pause for a moment. Before you drift off into your own warm, dreamy oblivion, take a second to like this video if you're enjoying this cozy but ever so slightly doom-filled stroll through the medieval subconscious. Subscribe if you want more soothing tales of symbolic dread. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm always amazed to see people from across the globe joining this little dream cult of historical weirdness. Right, back to dreams of death. You might be wondering, did normal people have these dreams or just monks and saint-adjacent figures? Oh, regular folks had them too. In fact, one of the most common categories of dream found in folk literature is the warning from beyond. Someone dreams of their own funeral, or they see themselves lying in bed while a procession of mourners walks past, led by their own mother, or they hear bells tolling and see themselves in a coffin made of sorrow and damp wood. What did people do when they had these dreams? Well, if you were smart, confess everything. Make peace with your enemies. Donate something to a local monastery. Fast. Flagellate yourself a little if you're feeling extra guilty. And definitely sleep with one eye open, just in case. You'd also tell your friends. These weren't private nightmares. They were public information. In villages, someone might go to the priest and say, "I dreamed that old Thomas walked into the river and vanished." And the priest might say, "That's because Thomas is going to die. Best get his last rites ready." And if Thomas did die, everyone nodded sagely and said, "Ah yes, the dream was true." If he didn't, well, maybe he was dead, spiritually speaking. Or maybe the dream was a warning and they'd narrowly avoided it. Or, maybe he'd made a deal with a demon. Either way, the dream wasn't ignored. There's even a case recorded in a 14th century French manuscript where a woman dreamed her husband was being dragged by black dogs into a forest, screaming. She woke up and told him. He laughed. "Silly woman," he said. The next day, he was gored by a boar and died in the woods. Silly indeed. Dreams of death weren't always literal. Sometimes they were symbolic, which meant the interpretation mattered just as much as the dream itself. Enter the dream books. You remember those, right? The alphabetized guides where dreams were decoded like prophecy bingo. If you dreamed of your teeth falling out, it meant someone would die. If you dreamed of water, it could mean birth or death, depending on whether the water was clean or full of frogs. Frogs equals bad. Always frogs. Dreaming of black clothing? Mourning. Dreaming of bells? Death. Dreaming of your own weeping face? Also death. Dreaming of digging a hole? Either death or you're just a 13th century landscaper with anxiety. In a world where plague, famine, and the occasional Viking made survival a coin toss, dreams were the closest thing people had to divine forecasting. And if they told you death was coming, you didn't roll your eyes and say, "Ugh, just a dream." You listened. And then, if you were very lucky, you told someone else, so that they could write it down. Because as strange as it sounds, many death dreams were recorded, copied, and passed down. They became part of a shared cultural memory. Evidence that the veil between life and death could be momentarily lifted in the haze of sleep. You turn over in bed. Your stomach growls. You still taste barley and garlic from dinner. Outside, a night bird hoots. It might be an owl, or an omen, or maybe just another bird with insomnia. You wonder, what would a medieval dream interpreter make of your dreams? The one where your teeth turn to gold? Greed. The one where you're flying naked over a monastery? Pride and indecency. The one where you die quietly in bed surrounded by friends and fresh bread? That's not a dream. That's a fantasy. Because in the real Middle Ages, most people didn't get that kind of ending. Which is why dreaming of a good death was sometimes the most comforting dream of all. And if you dreamed of your own corpse looking peaceful, well, maybe that was the best you could hope for. You wake up. It's still dark. Maybe around 3 in the morning. That cursed hour when even the roosters give up and let the demons have their fun. You're alone. And sweaty. And something has happened. Let's not be delicate. You've had one of those dreams. You know the kind. It involved someone you're not married to. Possibly someone you've never met. Maybe a saint. Maybe a nun. Maybe your neighbor's wife from 3 villages over who once made direct eye contact with you during Lent. And now you're panicking. Not because of the dream itself, but because of what it means. Because you're living in the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, dreaming of sex wasn't a quirky detail you giggled about over mead with friends. It was a full-blown spiritual crisis. Let's be clear, medieval people dreamed about sex just like everyone else. They were human. They had bodies. They had intrusive thoughts and weird moments and late-night mental detours through forbidden territory. But while today you might wake up thinking, weird dream, hope nobody finds my browser history, a medieval dreamer might bolt upright and immediately confess to a priest in case the dream was a sign they were doomed to eternal damnation. Because to a medieval mind, a sexy dream wasn't just a dream. It was sin, or temptation, or a glimpse into how corrupt and leaky your soul really was. Let's rewind a little. What did the church actually say about sexy dreams? Well, it's complicated. Officially, the church acknowledged that dreams were involuntary. What happened in your sleep wasn't something you could fully control. However, and it's a big however, if the dream reflected sinful desires you'd entertained while awake, then it wasn't innocent. It was a diagnosis. You see, the body was basically a sin sponge. It absorbed filth, lust, and bad habits like an unholy bath towel. And even if your conscious mind was technically innocent, your body remembered. And your dreams? They were like spiritual test results, printed out in your brain at night. So if you dreamed of lust, the church said, well, maybe you've been lustful. And if you enjoyed the dream? Oh dear, that meant you were consenting. And if you woke up from that dream, having experienced something, congratulations. Your mattress now counts as evidence in a celestial trial. But let's get more specific. Who was most concerned about this? Monks. Obviously. Because monks were celibate. Supposedly. In theory. They had taken vows of chastity. They were meant to be above the temptations of the flesh, fully devoted to God, to prayer, and to writing dramatic letters about how many demons lived in the monastery walls. And yet, the human body, stubborn beast that it is, doesn't really care about vows. So monks dreamed. And monks, leaked. And then monks panicked. There are entire treatises written by monks trying to figure out what it meant when they woke up sticky. Some blamed demons. Some blamed bad digestion. Some, especially the more honest ones, blamed themselves. There's a particularly anxious passage in a monastic manual from the 12th century where a monk confesses that even though he tried not to think lustful thoughts, his dreams kept bringing them back. He begged God to purify his sleep. He fasted. He whipped himself. He stopped talking to women altogether. Not just real women, mind you. Paintings of women. He covered them up, just in case. There was even a category of sin known as pollutio nocturna, literally nocturnal emission. And yes, it was discussed in detail. Some theologians said it was excusable if it happened without conscious consent. Others argued that if it happened too often, you were clearly spiritually compromised. You might be possessed, or worse, French. Which brings us to the question, what causes a sinful dream? Let's consult our old friend, the Dream Book of Daniel, and other medieval guides that basically turned your nightmares into heavenly report cards. According to some interpretations, dreaming of nakedness meant exposure, either of your sins or of your shame. Dreaming of intercourse? That could mean temptation, spiritual weakness, or the devil trying to nudge you into ruin. Dreaming of masturbation, If you'll forgive the word in this calming bedtime story, meant spiritual isolation. You were focused too much on your own desires, not on God, not on community, just you and your sins. But wait, it gets worse. Because sometimes the people in your dreams weren't strangers. They were saints. And this, understandably, caused absolute panic. Imagine waking up from a dream involving Saint Agnes and realizing, with dread, that you now needed to confess that to a priest, who would then write it down, in Latin, and maybe keep it in the Abbey archives forever. One monk wrote about having a dream involving Saint Catherine. She scolded him for lustful thoughts, then turned into a lion and ate him. He woke up sobbing and declared himself unworthy to even look at icons again. You can't make this up. Well, you can. But they didn't have Netflix, so this was entertainment. Let's not forget that women were dreamers too, and their dreams were equally scrutinized. If a woman dreamed of intimacy, she might be accused of being spiritually weak, or worse, a temptress. Even if it was involuntary. Even if she didn't want the dream. Because dreams weren't just about the dreamer. They were about the community. A dream could reveal your inner filth. And if you had inner filth, that could spread. Which is why confession was such a big deal. People confessed their dreams. Not just actions. Dreams. And priests were trained to listen, to interpret, and to assign penance. 3 Hail Marys for that vision of kissing Brother Peter's hand too long. 7 days of fasting for dreaming about your neighbor's daughter dancing at midsummer. 15 lashes and no meat until Lent because you enjoyed it. You could practically hear the shame sizzling like bacon in the guilt pan. But here's where it gets even more ironic. Despite all this fear, despite all this guilt, dreams about sex were everywhere. They showed up in literature, in sermons, in confessions, in jokes. One 13th century preacher told a story about a woman who dreamed she saw the devil in her bed. When she tried to run, he whispered sweet nothings in Latin and offered her wine. She drank it. She sinned. She woke up. She confessed. The moral? Dreams are dangerous, but women are more dangerous, and demons are fluent in romance. And what about medieval dream interpreters? Well, if you dreamed of bathing with someone, that meant unclean desires. If you dreamed of kissing, emotional temptation. If you dreamed of a wedding, especially to someone inappropriate, say, your cousin or a priest, that symbolized a spiritual union with sin. But there's a tiny glimmer of hope in all of this. Some thinkers, radical ones, like Thomas Aquinas, suggested that not all bodily reactions and dreams were sinful. If you didn't consent, it wasn't your fault. If you didn't will it, then your soul was still pure. Aquinas, bless him, basically said, guys, sometimes it just happens. Calm down. But of course, nuance and common sense aren't really medieval specialties. So the guilt continued, the dreams continued, and the mattresses probably needed replacing. So you lie there, curled up beneath your threadbare blanket, wondering what tonight will bring. A dream of fire? That's hell. A dream of water? That's temptation. A dream of a warm embrace, a stolen kiss, a lingering glance? Well, that's between you, your priest, and the next 6 months of spiritual punishment. Sleep tight. Try not to sin. You wake up. There's something breathing in your room. You open your eyes, and it's not your dog, because you don't own a dog. It's a goat. In your room. Looking right at you. You blink, confused. Then you blink again, harder. Oh, you're dreaming. Or, you were dreaming. Now you're awake, and you're not sure if the goat is still here, or if you've just been staring at your neighbor's goat too often, and now it's moved into your subconscious. Welcome to the wonderful, twitchy, totally unhinged world of animal dreams in the Middle Ages. Let's start with this. Medieval people lived much closer to animals than we do today. Literally and figuratively. Your average peasant probably shared living space with pigs, chickens, and maybe a cow. They didn't go to a petting zoo, they lived in one. So it's not surprising that animals showed up in dreams constantly. But here's the fun twist. They didn't just show up as background noise. Oh no, they were symbols. They were omens. They were possibly demonic messengers in fursuits. Because in medieval dream theory, every animal had a meaning. Let's start with the bear. If you dreamed of a bear, you were in trouble. Bears were symbols of brute force, anger, greed, and, Weirdly, arrogance. Dreaming of a bear might mean you're about to encounter someone violent, or that you're the violent one. Or, if you're unlucky, it might mean you're going to be eaten. Metaphorically, or literally, it's really best to avoid bears entirely. If the bear talked to you in your dream, you've either achieved sainthood or inhaled too many forge fumes. Either way, confession is advised. Next up, snakes. Snakes were the rock stars of dream symbolism, thanks to that whole Garden of Eden incident. If you dreamed of a snake, people immediately assume temptation, deceit, hidden sin. You were obviously being corrupted by someone or by your own wicked thoughts. Dreaming of being bitten? That was a direct hit. The devil's already halfway inside. Dreaming of a talking snake? You're now Moses, Eve, or on some serious medieval drugs. But here's the twist. In some cultures, snakes could also mean wisdom, duality, life cycles. So when you woke up after dreaming about a snake offering you advice on crop rotation, the real question was, are you a prophet? Or a heretic? Or just very, very tired? Moving along. Let's say you dreamed of a dog. Dogs could go either way. If the dog was loyal, friendly, and didn't have rabies, congratulations, you're probably dreaming of fidelity and virtue. But if the dog barked, bit you, looked at you weird, that was a betrayal dream. Someone in your life was plotting against you. Your brother, your neighbor, your other brother. The dog was trying to warn you. Unless, of course, it was a black dog, in which case, sorry, that was a demon. No symbolism. Just straight up infernal spawn. Good luck sleeping tonight. Now, let's get weird. Dreaming of a donkey? Welcome to the land of mockery and ignorance. Donkeys represented stupidity, stubbornness, and in some texts, sexual impropriety. Don't ask. Medieval people had issues. If the donkey was dancing or talking, oh boy, that meant folly disguised as wisdom. Someone in your life, maybe you, was pretending to be clever, but was actually being a huge, dancing idiot. A donkey in a dream could also mean you were taking on burdens that weren't yours. So if you woke up after riding a donkey through a burning field while juggling apples, that was your subconscious saying, hey, maybe don't volunteer to fix the millstone this week. You're emotionally overloaded, and also you've never been good at apples. How about cats? Cats were mysterious in dreams, much like they are in real life. Sometimes they were witches in disguise. Sometimes they were omens of deception. Sometimes they were just cats, scratching at your feet, screaming at the moon. One monk wrote about dreaming of a cat sitting on his chest and stealing his breath. It was probably sleep paralysis, or a demon, or a very needy tabby. Again, confess first, diagnose later. Birds, though, they were a whole category of dream madness. Dreaming of birds in flight? Good sign. Freedom. Spiritual elevation. Joy. Dreaming of birds being caged? Bad sign. Imprisoned desires. Block creativity. Possibly constipation. Dream interpretation was not an exact science. If the bird was black, it might be death. If it was white, it could be an angel. Or a lie. Or a message from your mother. Who knows? Owls were wisdom or darkness. Crows were death or gossip. Peacocks? Pride. Chickens? Cowardice. Geese? You need to make better decisions. Immediately. But maybe the most terrifying of all was dreaming of a fish. Yes, a fish. Because fish meant something was hidden, swimming below the surface. It was a classic symbol of the unknown, the subconscious. Or, in medieval Christian symbolism, the presence of Christ. If the fish spoke, you were probably a prophet. If the fish screamed, that wasn't a fish. That was your conscience. Now let's really get weird. What if you dreamed of a hybrid animal? A lion with a man's face, a snake with wings, a goat with too many eyes. These were seen as apocalyptic visions. They meant something serious was about to happen. Famine, flood, a new king, or your local baker was cheating on his flour rations again. Sometimes people dreamed of wolves wearing crowns. This meant power being given to someone unworthy. It might mean your lord was about to raise taxes again. It might also mean your sheep were doomed. And yes, dreams of dragons were common too, especially among knights. Dragons symbolized evil, yes, but also conquest. If you killed a dragon in your dream, victory, triumph. You're doing great. If the dragon killed you, you might want to prepare for some light tragedy, like disease, or losing your favorite sock. And then, there were the insects. Dreaming of lice? That meant sin. Dreaming of fleas? Impurity. Dreaming of bees? Surprise, that was usually a good thing. Bees were industrious, divine, sweet. Unless they stung you, then it was God punishing your pride. You had to be careful with dreams like these, because the medieval world didn't believe in coincidence. They believed everything was a sign. Animals and dreams weren't just random thoughts. They were messengers, warnings, sometimes even trials. The goat staring at you from your dream? That might be the devil in disguise, or a lost soul, or a tax collector. But you couldn't ignore it. You had to interpret, or at least talk to your priest, or your local village wise woman, or that one guy in town who read too many Latin scrolls and now refuses to make eye contact. Because dreams about animals meant your soul was trying to speak. And if you didn't listen, well, enjoy being chased by symbolic badgers for the rest of your life. So as you settle back into your medieval bed, wondering why that chicken had glowing eyes, or what it meant when the pig recited the Lord's Prayer in reverse, just remember, your dreams are trying to tell you something. Whether it's from God, the devil, your own subconscious, or last night's turnip stew, who's to say? Sleep well. And if you see a duck tonight, don't trust it. It knows what you did. You wake up in the middle of the night. Your linen sheets are stuck to you. Your mouth is dry. You sit up, blink a few times, and try to remember what just happened. There was a mountain. There were 3 moons. Your mother was weeping. And someone, possibly an angel, possibly your local blacksmith wearing a crown made of bread, told you that your village would be on fire by the next full moon. Now, you could do what any reasonable modern person would do, drink some water, go back to bed, and tell your therapist about it later. But you're not a modern person. You're a medieval peasant with fleas, religious trauma, and a robust belief that dreams are just another way God yells at you. And right now, you're thinking, was that a prophecy? Welcome to the glamorous world of medieval prophetic dreams, where everything means something, nothing is symbolic just for fun, and your subconscious might get you burned at the stake if you say too much out loud. Let's start with the basics. In the medieval mindset, dreams weren't just dreams. We've covered that. But prophetic dreams? Those were special. They weren't just warnings. They weren't just personal guilt trips from your own tortured conscience. They were glimpses of the future, of God's plan, of divine punishment for how many peas you ate last Lent. These dreams were considered dangerous, powerful, and if you shared them with the wrong person, you might accidentally trigger a riot, or a minor religious movement, or worse, a papal investigation. And yet, people loved them. They were irresistible, like medieval tabloids delivered straight to your sleeping brain. Think of them as the Netflix originals of the 13th century, apocalyptic, dramatic, and just vague enough to apply to everything. Let's dive into some of the more famous medieval dream prophecies, shall we? First up, Constantine the Great. Not technically medieval, but the story gets recycled about 50,000 times by monks desperate to sound cool, so it counts. Before a big battle, Constantine reportedly dreamed of a cross in the sky, along with the words, "In this sign, you will conquer." He wakes up, slaps a cross on his army shields, and goes on to win. And just like that, dreams are officially military strategy. Fast forward a few centuries, and now every time someone dreams about a glowing sword or a river of blood, the local priest gets nervous. Was it divine? Was it devilish? Or was it just a sausage? Then there's Joan of Arc, dreams and visions galore. Technically, her dreams were more hearing voices and seeing saints than standard REM cycle activity, but the idea was the same. God speaks to the chosen through dreams, or hallucinations, or prolonged fasting in drafty churches. Joan claimed divine guidance in her mission to kick the English out of France. The church eventually burned her alive for her trouble. Later, they changed their mind and made her a saint. You know, classic medieval apology. But it wasn't just saints and kings. Ordinary people had prophetic dreams too. There's the case of Thurkel's vision, an English peasant in 1206 who claimed to dream of the afterlife in excruciating detail. Angels, demons, sinners being cooked like meat. the whole works. His dream was so vivid it became a local pilgrimage attraction. People walked for miles to hear him describe the bit where a greedy tax collector was boiled in molten gold. 5 stars. Would dream again. And of course, there were the classic apocalyptic dreams. You dreamt of the moon turning to blood? That meant famine. Dreamt of the sun going dark? War. Dreamed of 7-headed beasts? You're probably just a monk with too much exposure to the book of Revelation and not enough fiber in your diet. But you'd still write it down. Probably in Latin, with a lot of exclamation marks and illustrations of people being smited. Some towns even had local dream prophets, people who were known for seeing things. Old women, shepherds, sometimes even children. They'd dream of flood, plague, or royal death, and when it happened, they were hailed as vessels of divine insight, until they were accused of witchcraft and thrown in a river to see if they floated. Because medieval Europe had a habit of loving prophets right up until the prophecy became inconvenient. But how did people tell the difference between a real prophetic dream and, say, a hallucination caused by eating spoiled cheese? Enter the dream judges. Yes, that was a thing. Learned clergy, monks, and sometimes even traveling interpreters who would listen to your dream and tell you what it meant, whether you liked it or not. They'd compare your dream to biblical symbols, ancient texts, or dream manuals. There were actual step-by-step guides to deciphering dreams. Think of it as an unholy mix between a horoscope, a diagnostic flowchart, and that one friend who always interprets your dreams as proof you're secretly in love with your dentist. Dream of a falling star? That's impending disaster. Dream of water? Depends. Is it clean? It's spiritual renewal. Dirty? You're spiritually dirty. Dream of fire, passion, or death, or divine judgment. Honestly, fire was a wild card. But here's the twist. Some dreamers wanted to have prophetic dreams, so they tried to induce them. How? Well, you could pray, fast, sleep on church floors, lie on a saint's grave, or, if you were really desperate, ingest some fun medieval herbs and see what the cosmos had to offer. Dream incubation, they called it. You'd spend the night in a holy place, often a shrine, and hope the saint in question would show up in your dream with helpful life advice, like stop stealing turnips or don't marry Jeffrey. He smells like damp wood. This wasn't fringe behavior. This was common. Monks did it. Nobles did it. Even kings occasionally asked saints to show up in their sleep with political advice. Spoiler, they usually didn't. But that didn't stop people from believing. One example, St. Cuthbert's shrine at Durham. People would sleep next to his tomb, hoping to be healed, or at least to receive a divine message. Sometimes they claimed success. Other times, they just woke up cold, disappointed, and covered in candle wax. But even when dreams didn't lead to prophecy, they could still be dangerous. Why? Because if your dream predicted something bad, and then it happened, people might assume you caused it. Prophetic dreams could brand you as a holy visionary, or a heretic, or a witch, or a low-level wizard with goat privileges. It really depended on who you told, how convincing you were, and whether or not your dream included livestock. The church walked a fine line with prophecy. On the one hand, they believed in divine revelation. On the other hand, they really hated it when peasants acted like prophets. That was priest territory. If God was going to speak through anyone, he'd use a bishop, thank you very much. Which meant prophetic dreams had to be handled carefully. You could write them down. You could tell your confessor. But if you started gathering followers, preaching in public, claiming you had visions of the Pope turning into a lizard, yeah, that's how you end up on trial for heresy. And yet, medieval Europe was filled with dreamers. Real ones. Not metaphorical follow-your-passion dreamers. Literal dreamers. People who believed the world could be understood through sleep. That God, or something, was whispering to them in the dark. They dreamed of kings dying, cities burning, heavens opening, wolves speaking Latin, comets falling, armies marching. And sometimes they were right. Just enough to make everyone nervous. So next time you wake up from a dream where the moon is bleeding, your grandmother is speaking in riddles, and your dog is wearing a bishop's hat, just remember, in the medieval world, you'd be considered either chosen, cursed, or criminally in need of an exorcism. And you'd better hope your priest is in a good mood. Sleep well. Try not to dream of 7-headed goats tonight. Unless they offer you a prophecy, then write it down. You never know who might believe you. You wake up. Again. It's morning. The rooster's late. Again. You sit up in your straw bed, which smells like regret and mildew. Your hair is stuck to your face with dried sweat. Your feet are cold. Someone is already banging pots downstairs and cursing about flour. But none of that matters, because you've just had a dream. A real one. Not the usual weird montage of sheep, bread, and that time the bishop fell in a well. No, this dream was vivid. Uncomfortably vivid. There was a river of fire. A voice called your name. You saw your father, who's been dead for 5 years, trying to hand you a fish wrapped in parchment. You are, to put it gently, deeply unsettled. Now what? Well, in the medieval world, there was a system for this. Sort of. And it usually began with you sitting very still on the edge of your bed and wondering if your dream meant you were dying, cursed, pregnant, blessed, or in trouble for not going to confession last week. You take a moment to breathe. Because medieval life didn't have group chats, therapists, or Google. You couldn't just post, "Weird dream. Y'all, anyone know what it means when a bear weeps blood while standing on a loaf of rye bread?" No. You had to figure this out the old-fashioned way, through fear, speculation, and the nearest authority figure with a decent grasp of Latin. So let's talk options. Option 1, confession. That's your safest bet. The church loved a good dream, especially if it made you more afraid of hell. You'd shuffle off to the local priest, probably barefoot and wearing something itchy, and whisper your dream during confession like it was a secret sin. And the priest would listen. Then he'd decide if this was A. a divine warning, B. a demonic trick, C. just you being dramatic because you had cabbage stew too late at night. In most cases, he'd nod solemnly, tell you to pray more, maybe fast for a day, and try not to think about it too hard. If he liked you, he might give you a comforting interpretation. If he didn't, he might tell you it was a sign you were on the road to damnation. Medieval spiritual counseling was basically roulette with incense. Option 2, write it down. This is where things get weirdly bureaucratic. Because, believe it or not, some people in the Middle Ages kept dream journals. Yes. Seriously. Usually monks, scholars, or literate nobles. People with enough time and ink to make their subconscious issues into bedtime literature. Some monasteries even kept official logs of dreams, especially those that seemed prophetic or religious. The logic was simple. God speaks through dreams, right? So why not keep records? What followed was a lot of dusty manuscripts filled with beautifully calligraphed nonsense like, "Brother Anselm dreamed of a golden stag drinking from a silver river. He awoke sweating and convinced the deer was Christ." Or, "Sister Marjorie was visited by the Virgin Mary, who asked her to refrain from gossiping about the apothecary's wart. Sister Marjorie has been quiet ever since." These dream logs weren't jokes. They were serious. They were spiritual clues, theological riddles, and sometimes just an excuse to roast each other in writing under the guise of divine vision. And the act of recording a dream was seen as pious, a form of meditation, a way of externalizing your inner life without sounding too heretical. Of course, if you weren't literate, your options were more vocal. Which brings us to option 3, tell your friends. Not always a good idea. Because depending on who your friends were, your dream could go from odd and interesting to this person is clearly possessed in under 30 seconds. Still, people talked. In village markets, in bathhouses, in taverns, over mugs of barely fermented beer and piles of onion-soaked regret. And if the dream sounded dramatic enough, it might spread. There are documented cases of entire towns getting worked up over one person's dream, especially if it involved disasters. You tell your neighbor that you saw a wave of rats sweeping through the village in your sleek. Suddenly your neighbor is telling their cousin, who's telling the blacksmith, who's shouting it to the miller. By nightfall, people are howling garlic on doorways, sacrificing chickens, and whispering about divine punishment. All because you ate 3 bowls of turnip stew and had a funky REM cycle. Which brings us to the dark side of dream sharing, mass panic. And the church really didn't like mass panic, especially when it got in the way of business, taxes, or general obedience. So they created rules. Unofficial ones, mostly, but powerful all the same. Rule number 1, if your dream made the priest look bad, it was heresy. Rule number 2. If your dream said a woman should lead anything, it was heresy. Rule number 3. If your dream caused anyone to stop tithing, it was, you guessed it, heresy. So dream sharing became risky. Not just socially, but legally. There are records of dreamers being interrogated, punished, or even excommunicated for spreading false visions. All because their subconscious dared to get creative. One particularly famous example: a French peasant woman in the 14th century claimed to have dreamed that the Virgin Mary told her the local bishop was corrupt and should be replaced by her neighbor Gerard. Which, frankly, was a bold move. She told enough people that it caused a scandal. She was publicly whipped for inciting unrest. Gerard was not promoted. The bishop remained bishop. And everyone agreed to stop asking women about their dreams. Temporarily. Until the next saint vision happened. But dream sharing wasn't always a ticket to trouble. Sometimes it was the start of a religious movement. Like with the Flagellants, a group of people in the 13th and 14th centuries who believed the end of the world was coming, based largely on dreams and visions, and decided to start publicly whipping themselves through towns to repent for humanity's sins. Yes, that happened. It got so intense the Pope had to issue statements telling people to stop flaying themselves and go back to church like normal Catholics. It didn't work. Because when dreams feel real, people behave accordingly. They start marching, preaching, panicking, and occasionally buying relics of questionable authenticity from monks who swear the mummified squirrel is actually Saint Sebastian's finger. Now, let's talk about dream symbols, again. But from a post-dream perspective. You had the dream. You panicked. You told your friend. Now you're lying awake, replaying every weird detail. The color of the sky. The smell of ashes. The sound of your dead aunt saying turn around. What does it mean? Well, if you had access to a dream manual or knew someone who could read, you might try to interpret it. Popular texts, like Somniel Danieli's, a sort of medieval dream dictionary, offered page after page of dream symbol definitions. They were maddeningly specific. Dreaming of lions might mean victory in battle, or being eaten soon. Dreaming of climbing a tree? Prosperity, unless you fall, in which case, poverty. Dreaming of teeth falling out? Death in the family. Universally terrifying. No one likes this one. Dreaming of flying? Pride, or spiritual elevation, or gas. So medieval people would obsess over their dreams the same way modern people obsess over star signs or personality quizzes. Oh, you dreamed of a black goat near a church? Classic envy and paganism combination. Watch your back. But the problem is, interpretation was a minefield. One symbol could mean 3 things, depending on the moon phase, the time you fell asleep, and how recently you sinned. So it wasn't really about solving the dream. It was about feeling out its mood. Was it holy, terrifying, or just your brain doing a weird puppet show with old memories and stew fumes? Monks spent years studying dream theory. People like Macrobius, Gregory the Great, and Albertus Magnus all wrote long, tangled texts about what made a dream valid, spiritual, or demonic. It was a bit like writing a PhD thesis on why your brain decided to show you a horse with your dad's face last night. But it mattered. Because for many, dreams weren't just dreams. They were instructions. They were signs. They were the medieval version of GPS, only instead of a robot voice telling you to turn left, it was a flaming angel pointing at a mushroom. And if you ignore them, well, good luck. So tonight, when you go to sleep, think like a medieval peasant. Every flicker of your dream might be divine revelation, or demonic temptation, or the turnip stew from dinner. Either way, try writing it down. You never know. Your weird dream about floating through a swamp full of singing cats might someday inspire a pilgrimage, a riot, or a highly profitable shrine. Or it might just be something to laugh about with your imaginary friend in a dream tavern. Either way, it's probably best to keep the priest out of it. For now.